The sound of gravel crunching under his pickup truck's tires barely audible through the rolled-up windows inside the house hummed with normalcy. The distant thrum of Emma's music drifted down the hall, and the soft clinking of pots and pans came from the kitchen. Jake stepped inside, unzipping his work jacket and setting down his metal toolbox by the door. His body ached from 10 hours at the manufacturing plant, his hands still bearing the faint smell of machine oil despite washing them twice before leaving. But walking through that door always brought him an odd sense of peace. This was what he worked for. "Hey babe, dinner will be ready in 20. Sarah called out from the kitchen without turning around, her voice cheerful and familiar. "Thanks, hon." Jake replied, hanging his jacket on the hook near the door. He walked over to lean against the kitchen doorframe, watching her. She wore the apron he bought her during their vacation to Yellowstone last summer, humming softly as she stirred something aromatic on the stove. The smell was inviting, comforting, even, and Jake felt a brief wave of guilt for the way he'd been drifting lately. Maybe the long shifts at the plant had made him inattentive. Maybe he wasn't as present as he used to be. "Dad, can you help me with my calculus homework later?" Emma called from her room. Jake smiled, exhaustion giving way to warmth. "Of course, sweetheart," he answered. It was these moments that made the overtime hours worth it. He looked forward to helping her, like feeling needed, but something had fell off for weeks now. Small intangible things. The way Sarah smiles lingered less when she looked at him. The way Emma's tone seemed sharper, as if she was annoyed by his very presence. He chalked it up to teenage mood swings and the natural ebb and flow of marriage. They were still solid, weren't they? He pushed the thought aside, determined to enjoy dinner with his family. Later that evening, as he walked past Emma's room, something caught his attention. Her door was slightly ajar, and her voice carried out into the hallway. "No way, Chloe. My dad's still as clueless as ever." Emma said, her tone casual but laced with amusement. Jake froze mid-step, his ears straining to catch every word. "Mom's boyfriend even drops me off at school in his BMW sometimes," Emma added, laughing lightly. Jake's breath caught. His mind raced to process what he was hearing. Mom's boyfriend? What the hell was she talking about? "No way." Emma giggled, her voice dropping slightly. "Yeah, they're just waiting for my loser dad to finish funding my college before they ditch him and move to Denver." Jake felt his knees weaken. He leaned against the wall, clutching at the cool surface for support. The words repeated in his mind like a broken record. Loser dad waiting to ditch him. Mom's boyfriend. The hallway spun. His chest tightened with a suffocating mix of rage and heartbreak. "Emma, dinner's ready," Sarah called from the kitchen. Jake quickly stepped away from the door, his heart pounding in his ears. He forced his face into a neutral expression and walked toward the dining room, his thoughts screaming. But he couldn't afford to let them see anything was wrong. Not yet. Sarah smiled as she set the plates on the table. "Perfect timing. I was just about to call you. Emma, come eat." Emma came bounding into the room, her phone still in hand. She barely acknowledged Jake, sitting down with the easy confidence of someone who had no idea their entire world was about to be turned upside down. Jake forced a smile. "Looks great, Sarah," he said, picking up his fork. "Thanks, honey. It's your favorite meatloaf with mashed potatoes." She flashed him a grin, but it didn't reach her eyes. Emma dug into her plate, scrolling on her phone between bites. "So dead," she said casually, not looking up. "I was thinking I might need some extra spending money for school this month. Is that okay?" Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. "We'll see," he replied, keeping his tone even. "Oh, come on." Emma winced, finally looking at him. "It's not a big deal. Just like $300. Let's talk about it later." Jake said, his voice firmer this time. Emma rolled her eyes. "Whatever." Sarah laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Teenagers, right?" she said, reaching for Jake's hand. Her touch felt like fire on his skin. He fought the urge to pull away, instead squeezing her hand lightly. The weight of her betrayal burned in his chest. But he kept his face calm, even pleasant. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of forced smiles and shallow conversation. Jake played his part perfectly, laughing at Sarah's jokes and asking Emma about her classes. They didn't suspect a thing. When dinner was over, Jake helped clear the table. Sarah leaned in to kiss his cheek as she passed him in the kitchen. "Thanks for helping. I'm going to take a shower." "Sure thing." Jake set his voice tight. Emma retreated to her room without a word, leaving Jake alone in the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty plates in the sink, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to scream, to break something, to demand answers. But he knew better. If he exploded now, they'd just lie to his face, cover their tracks, spin some story to make him doubt what he'd heard. No, he needed to be smart about this. He turned off the kitchen light and went to Emma's room, knocking softly. "Yeah?" she called out. Jake opened the door just enough to peek in. "You still need help with your calculus?" Emma looked up from her phone, surprised. "Yeah, I guess." He sat beside her, forcing himself to focus on the equations in front of him. It took everything he had not to lash out, but he kept his voice steady, his movements calm. "Thanks, Dad," Emma said after they finished. She smiled at him, a genuine smile, as if she hadn't just mocked him hours earlier. "Anytime, kiddo," Jake replied, standing to leave as he closed her door behind him. A single thought solidified in his mind. This ends tonight. Jake waited until the house was silent. Sarah's soft breathing came from their bedroom, and Emma's music had long since stopped. He sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, surrounded by folders and documents. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. The records before him seemed surreal. Each document, each statement, a reminder of everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, years of overtime shifts, weekend work, all for the future. He thought he shared with Sarah and Emma, but now they were nothing more than paper, empty like the promises his family had made. Jake reached for the stack of documents, his hand shaking slightly, but he forced himself to study it. He opened the first folder. Inside were the details of Emma's college fund, the account he'd been faithfully contributing to for years. He pulled up the online portal on his laptop, his eyes fixed on the balance. Emma had always been his pride. He'd worked double shifts, taken on extra responsibilities at the plant, all to ensure she had the education he'd never gotten. He'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, even his health. And now all of it was about to be taken away by the very people he loved. No more. Jake's fingers moved across the keyboard as he accessed the tuition payment portal. A few clicks, and the automatic payments were canceled. He paused, staring at the confirmation screen for a long moment, almost as if waiting for something to change. But nothing did. With a deep breath, he moved to the next account, their joint savings. He logged in, his mind steady now, the coldness settling in as he navigated through the balances. Years of careful budgeting, their emergency fund, the money they'd save for the house renovations. He transferred everything into his personal account. Every cent. The amount was substantial, enough to last him years if he was careful. Each transfer felt like a small act of liberation, and yet it didn't feel like enough. He needed more. Next, he turned to the mortgage account. They'd been paying it off for 12 years, and there wasn't much left. He accessed the account and paid off the remaining balance. Every last penny. The house was his now, but that wasn't enough either. He needed to sever all ties. He began updating their insurance policies, removing Sarah and Emma as beneficiaries. No more connections. He needed to wipe the slate clean. With every keystroke, Jake felt a little bit lighter, but also colder. His mind raced, calculating the next steps, making sure every loose end was tied up. Several hours, it felt like the weight of everything he had built was now safely under his control. Finally, he wrote the note. "Congratulations on your future in Denver. Enjoy it on your own dime." It was simple to the point. He wasn't going to waste time on flowery words or emotional pleas. He had already been betrayed once. He wouldn't let himself fall for lies again. The divorce papers were placed neatly on the table beside the note. He had prepared them earlier, the final step in ending everything. Jake sat back, rubbing his face with his hands. The exhaustion hit him now, but it was different this time. It wasn't the physical exhaustion of a long shift at the plant. It was the kind that comes from facing a painful truth. He stood up and walked to the hallway, peering into the bedroom. Sarah was asleep, her back turned to him. The soft rise and fall of her breath seemed so foreign now. The woman he had loved, trusted, had betrayed him in the most intimate of ways. And Emma, his daughter, had stood beside her. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten. There was no going back. As quietly as possible, he walked through the house, gathering his things. His clothes, his personal items, the ones that were truly his. The rest, everything he had shared with them, he didn't need anymore. He picked up the small duffel bag he had packed earlier, containing only the essentials. Nothing more. He would figure out the rest later. Before leaving, he stopped at the kitchen table one last time. He stared at the papers for a moment, wondering if he had made the right decision. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed the divorce papers and the note. He walked to the front door, his hand on the handle. He hesitated. It would be the last time he crossed this threshold. No second chances. He reminded himself. He couldn't let himself fall back into the same trap. The cool night air greeted him as he stepped outside. The faint sound of crickets filled the silence. He locked the door behind him, turning the key for the last time. Jake drove off into the night without a second glance. The headlights slicing through the darkness as the miles stretched between him and the life he had once known. Felt strangely liberating. He had nothing but himself now, and that was enough. The sun had barely risen when Jake arrived at his destination. A quiet town called Cedar Falls, nestled between rolling hills. The streets were still empty as he pulled into a small motel parking lot. He needed a place to rest just for a night, maybe two. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew he needed distance to clear his mind. He checked in at the front desk, the woman behind the counter barely glancing up from her paperwork. Jake didn't care. He was used to being invisible now. He was used to being alone. The room was basic, a bed, a TV, a small bathroom. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in his hand. He had already disconnected his old number, deleted his social media accounts. The silence was deafening, but it was also a relief. He had been living in a fog for months, maybe even years, the lies, the betrayal, all of it. But now, in the quiet of this room, the reality was sinking in. He was free, free from the deceit, free from the facade. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt the weight lifting off his shoulders. As the hours ticked by, Jake didn't sleep. He didn't need to. His mind was already planning the next step. He would rebuild. He would start fresh. And most importantly, he would make sure they never saw him coming again. It was still early when Sarah woke up. She stretched lazily, blinking against the sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She reached for Jake, but the bed was cold, empty. She frowned, sitting up and glancing around the room. His work clothes were gone. She stood quickly, rushing into the hallway. "Jake?" She called, but there was no response. Her heart began to race as she checked the rest of the house. Empty. Everything was gone, not even a note. Panic set in. She hurried to Emma's room. "Emma, have you seen your dad?" She asked urgently. Emma, groggy, sat up in bed. "What do you mean? He's not here." Sarah's chest tightened. "He's gone. He's really gone. Maybe he's just at work or something." Emma muttered, not fully awake yet. Sarah shook her head, rushing to the kitchen, hoping to find a clue. Her eyes landed on the dining table, the divorce papers, the note. She stared at the words for a long time, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Congratulations on your future in Denver. Enjoy it on your own dime." Her breath caught. These were the last words she would ever hear from him. Jake didn't tell anyone where he was going. Not his coworkers, not his friends from the plant, not even the few people who had known him for years. He simply vanished, like a man erased from the world. When he walked out of his house that night, leaving behind the betrayal and heartache, he didn't feel a single pang of regret. There was no hesitation. It was final. His life as he knew it was over. The decision was swift without fanfare. He deleted his social media accounts one after the other, each click of the mouse severing another connection to the past. He changed his phone number, cutting off every avenue for contact, ensuring that the people he'd once known would have no way of finding him. With a single duffel bag and no real destination in mind, he drove, letting the road pull him into the unknown. He passed towns he couldn't name. It was a Roy Barrendyes that blurred together under the haze of his exhaustion. Finally, after days of aimless driving, he found Cedar Falls, a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills, a place where no one knew his name, where he could start over. There were no grand plans, no aspirations beyond just existing. Jake rented a modest apartment above an old bookstore and found work at Miller's hardware store. He was nothing to write home about, but it was enough to survive, enough to keep his head down. The first few months were the hardest. Jake couldn't escape the thoughts that clung to him. No matter how far he ran, the nights were the worst. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face, heard Emma's laughter echoing in the back of his mind. He felt the sting of betrayal in his bones. What had he done to deserve this? The questions swirled endlessly. What had gone wrong? Where had it all fallen apart? He replayed the moments, the conversations, the subtle shifts in their lives that should have warned him. He had been so blind, so caught up in keeping everything together for them that he had failed to see the cracks forming beneath his feet. At night, he lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to find sleep. There were no answers, just empty space and painful memories. He would wake up in the mornings exhausted, as though he had fought a battle in his sleep. It was during one of these sleepless nights that he decided to seek help. He found a local counselor, someone who specialized in helping people process betrayal and abandonment. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was desperate. The first session was uncomfortable. Jake didn't speak much. He just sat there, arms crossed, listening as the counselor asked questions he didn't want to answer. The counselor was patient, but Jake felt nothing but anger and frustration. But over time, things began to shift. Slowly, Jake found the courage to speak. He let the floodgates open, allowing the pain and confusion to spill out. And in turn, the counselor helped him untangle the knots inside his head. The therapy wasn't magic. It didn't solve everything, but it helped. It gave him a space to process the feelings he had buried for so long. And as he did the work, he began to see a path forward, a way to rebuild. Jake joined a support group shortly after beginning therapy. It wasn't much. Just a few people gathered in a small community center room once a week. But it was exactly what he needed. The first meeting felt awkward. He barely spoke, just sat in the back and listened. There was a man who had lost his wife to addiction, a woman who had been betrayed by her business partner, and a few others who had been left behind in various ways. Their stories resonated with Jake in ways he hadn't expected. The pain was universal, and though their circumstances were different, the emotions were the same. It was in this group that he met Grace. She was quiet at first, much like Jake, but there was a warmth to her that drew him in. She had a gentle demeanor, a kindness in her eyes that seemed to pierce through his hardened shell. One night, after the group session ended, Grace lingered. Jake, who had gotten used to isolating himself, hesitated but then walked over to her. "Hey," he said, his voice a little rough from disuse. "I've seen you here a few times." Grace smiled faintly. "Yeah, I come every week. It helps, you know." Jake nodded, not sure what to say. He didn't want to get too close, didn't want to share too much. But something about Grace made him feel like he could. "Do you want to grab coffee or something?" she asked after a moment. "I've been meaning to talk to someone, and I figured, why not now?" Jake hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of connection, but the loneliness was unbearable. He nodded. "Sure, coffee sounds good." They left the community center together, walking to a small cafe down the street. As they sat across from each other, Grace spoke first. "So what brought you to the group?" she asked, her voice soft. Jake ran a hand through his hair. I'm just trying to move on. It's hard, you know? Life. It's just not what I thought it was." Grace nodded. "I get it. I was in a bad place too. My husband left me for someone else. I didn't even see it coming." Jake studied her for a moment. "How'd you deal with it?" Grace shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "I didn't at first. I drank too much, avoided everyone. But eventually, I realized I had to let go for my own sanity." Jake thought about this for a long moment. He wanted to ask more, wanted to know how she had found the strength to move forward. But something held him back. Instead, he just nodded. "I guess I'm still trying to figure that out." Grace gave him a sympathetic look. "It's a process. You'll get there." They talked for hours that evening, slowly unraveling their stories. Jake found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. Grace was patient, kind, and somehow she made him feel heard. By the time they left the cafe, Jake felt a little lighter. Not a lot, but enough to notice. The following months were a blur of quiet routines. Jake continued his job at the hardware store, and every week he attended the support group. But now there was something different about it. He looked forward to seeing Grace. They began meeting outside of the group, grabbing lunch, taking walks, talking about everything and nothing. Jake found himself looking forward to these moments, though he still kept his guard up. He was afraid of getting too close to someone again. But Grace made it easier than he expected. They spoke about their pasts, their heartbreaks, but never too deeply. It was always a slow, careful dance, learning to trust, learning to be vulnerable again. Grace didn't rush him. She understood his pain, and that made all the difference. Jake's wounds didn't heal overnight. They didn't disappear at all. But with each passing day, he began to rebuild, to trust himself again, to trust that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a second chance at happiness. It wasn't the life he had imagined for himself, but in this quiet town with Grace by his side, it was a life that felt like it could be enough. For the first time in a long time, Jake believed in the possibility of starting over. The first few months of his new life had been hard for Jake, but slowly, Grace's quiet strength and unwavering patience began to heal parts of him he didn't even realize were broken. She wasn't like Sarah. There were no flashy promises, no expectations of grandeur. She was kind, soft-spoken, and genuinely interested in getting to know him. Grace had experienced loss, too. She wasn't someone who pretended everything was okay when it wasn't. She understood pain in a way that felt familiar, comforting even. Jake would never forget the first real conversation they had outside of the support group. It was after a long week. He had arrived tired, worn from work, his mind heavy from the past. But the minute he saw Grace's face, something softened in him. "Hey, how's it going?" Grace asked, her smile gentle but warm. She was already sitting at their usual booth, a cup of coffee in front of her. Jake sat down, his eyes still clouded with the weight of the past. "I'm surviving. Work's still draining, but it's manageable." She nodded, but there was a hint of knowing in her gaze. "I get it. I've been there. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what you're doing. It's what you've left behind." Jake met her eyes for once, feeling seen. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded because what could he say? The words he needed to express never seemed to come out right. "So what was it really like?" Grace asked quietly, leaning in slightly. Her voice was full of empathy, not curiosity. Before everything changed, Jake took a deep breath. Feeling the familiar ache return to his chest. "It felt like I was doing everything right, you know? I work hard, try to be a good husband, father. I thought if I just kept pushing forward, it would all work out. But you can't keep a house standing if the foundation is rotting beneath it." Grace took a sip of her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "No, you can't, but that's not your fault. Not everything is your responsibility." Jake looked down at his hands, surprised by how much he wanted to believe her words. They talked for hours that day. It wasn't just small talk. It was real. They shared their pain, their scars, their dreams for something better. And as they did, Jake felt the first seed of hope planted deep inside him. Over time, their bond deepened. They went on hikes together, took trips to nearby towns, spent lazy afternoons reading. In the park, Jake found solace in the simplicity of it all. Grace never asked for more than he was willing to give. She was there when he needed space, and she was there when he needed a shoulder to lean on. But it was never forced, there was no pressure, and that was the difference. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together, another quiet, peaceful moment, Grace turned to him, a soft smile on her face. "You know, I never imagined my life would end up like this," she said, stirring a pot of soup. "I didn't think I'd get remarried, or even find someone who understood the pain I went through." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. "I didn't either. I thought I was done. But then I met you, and I realized maybe there's more to life than what I had before." Her smile grew, and she stepped toward him. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you found your way to me." Jake's chest tightened. In that moment, he realized that not only was he ready to open his heart again, but he wanted to share his future with Grace. The proposal was simple, nothing extravagant, no grand gestures. Just two people sitting by the fire on a quiet evening. "Grace," Jake started, his voice shaky. It had taken him weeks to get the courage to say it. He had known deep down that this was the right choice, but even then the words felt too big. Too final. Grace, sensing his hesitation, reached out and took his hand. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for." She said softly, "No, I'm ready." Jake replied, his voice firmer this time. "I don't need grand gestures. I just need to say that I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Grace's eyes softened and she squeezed his hand again. "Jake, I know this isn't easy for either of us. We both carry our past, but I want to move forward with you." Jake pulled out a simple ring from his pocket, holding it in front of her. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She didn't need to say anything. She simply nodded, her smile radiant. Yes, they kissed, and in that moment, everything felt possible. The wedding was small, just close family and a few friends from the support group who had become like family. It wasn't a lavish affair. It didn't need to be. It was a celebration of their quiet love, their shared healing, and their commitment to each other. Jake's heart swelled as Grace walked down the aisle, the soft music echoing through the small chapel. It wasn't the wedding he had imagined when he was younger, but it was perfect. It was real. They exchanged vows, simple promises that held more weight than anything he'd ever said before. "I promise to stand by you," Jake said, his voice steady through the quiet chapel, through the quiet times and the storms. "I promise to honor you, to trust you, and to love you for all that you are and all that you will become." Grace's eyes were wet with tears as she spoke. "I promise to love you, Jake, to be patient, to forgive, and to always support you now, matter what life brings our way." And then they were married, just like that. Months passed. It was soon after the wedding that Grace shared the news. "Jake," she said, sitting beside him one evening after dinner, "I'm pregnant." Jake froze, his mind taking a moment to catch up with her words. "Pregnant?" "Yes." Grace smiled, her face glowing. "Twins." Jake felt his world shift. For the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He didn't feel like a failure. He felt like he had a real chance at happiness. Over the next few months, they prepared for the babies. It was a whirlwind of decisions. Nursery colors, baby names, preparing for the life ahead. Jake had never imagined himself in this situation. But as he painted the nursery walls and picked out tiny clothes, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. But even as their joy grew, Jake couldn't shake the sense that his past might still find him. He couldn't let go of the fear that one day, someone, Sarah, Emma, or the man who had been with Sarah, might show up to shatter his newfound life. And then it happened. One afternoon, just after Grace had left for a doctor's appointment with her mother, there was a knock on the door. Jake opened it to find a man standing there. The man was tall, dressed in a well-tailored suit. He didn't look like anyone Jake knew, but there was something familiar in his presence. "I'm looking for Jake Martinez," the man said, his voice stern. Jake's blood ran cold. His heart raced. "Who are you?" "I'm with a private investigation firm. Your ex-wife Sarah has requested we locate you. There are some issues to settle." Jake stiffened, his worst fears coming to fruition. He didn't know how long he stood there, frozen by the words. But in the end, he knew there was only one thing he had to do. He closed the door in the man's face. And for the first time in a long time, Jake didn't look back. Sarah and Emma's lives had spiraled into chaos after Jake's departure. The comfortable, predictable world they had once known shattered in the wake of his disappearance. They were left with nothing. Not the house, not the security they had once taken for granted. At first, Sarah had clung to the belief that her lover, Brad, would take care of everything. After all, he had promised her a lavish life, unfilled with luxury and the high-end comfort she had become accustomed to. But as soon as the money from Jake's accounts ran dry, Brad was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared as quickly as he had entered their lives, leaving Sarah with only empty promises and mounting debt. Sarah couldn't grasp the reality at first. She thought things would somehow fall into place. She thought maybe she could find another way, another man, another solution. But none came. Her savings were gone in a matter of months, drained by the high-end lifestyle she had tried to maintain. Denver, once her dream, was now nothing more than a cruel joke. The dream of starting over had slipped through her fingers like sand. Emma, too, was lost. College had been a distant memory now. Her dreams of a bright future were replaced with the harshness of reality. She had dropped out, unable to pay for the tuition, and unwilling to let her mother continue to shoulder the financial burden. She had found a job at a rundown diner where the hours were long and the pay was barely enough to cover the bills. It wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but it was all she could do now. The tension between mother and daughter grew with each passing day. The once close bond they shared was fraying at the edges. Sarah would snap at Emma, blaming her for not doing more, and Emma would snap right back, accusing her mother of ruining their lives. They had no money, no options, and no one else to turn to. But one day, everything changed. They managed to track Jake down. Jake had settled into his new life. His house, while small and modest, felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos he had left behind. He had a routine now, one that brought him peace. He was building something with grace. Something real. Something he hadn't even known he needed. He had found his happiness again, or at least the quiet acceptance that he no longer had, to deal with the people who had betrayed him. It was an ordinary Thursday when he answered the knock at his door. He opened it, expecting a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, his world was rocked by the sight of Sarah and Emma standing on his doorstep. Sarah looked almost unrecognizable. Her makeup was smeared, her clothes disheveled, and her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. She was clutching her purse tightly in one hand, as though it were the last thing keeping her grounded. Emma stood behind her, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Jake," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "Please just hear us out. We've been through so much. I've been through so much. We're sorry. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was foolish. I was selfish. And I never realized what I had until you were gone." Jake's expression remained unchanged. He didn't feel anything for her anymore. Sarah took a step closer, her voice growing more desperate. "I love you, Jake. I always have. I never stopped. I never stopped caring about you. Please just let us talk. Give me a chance to make things right." Emma's voice broke through. "Dad, please," she said, stepping forward as well, her tears-streaked face pleading with him. "I was wrong. I was young and stupid. I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. Please just give us another chance. Please." Jake stared at them, feeling nothing. For a moment, there was complete silence between them, the weight of their past hanging heavily in the air. He had imagined this moment in his mind countless times, but he hadn't anticipated the emptiness he now felt. He could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation, but there was something else in his chest, a coldness, an indifference that made their pleas feel like echoes in an empty room. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You're sorry now? After everything? After you made fun of me behind my back? After you called me a loser, Dad?" "Emma, where was this remorse then?" Sarah stumbled back as though his words physically struck her. Emma froze, her face going pale. Sarah dropped her gaze to the ground, her hand trembling as she wiped the tears from her eyes. "Please, Jake," Sarah sobbed, sinking to her knees. "I'll do anything. I'll make it right. Just give us a chance to fix this. Please just let us back into your life. I was wrong. I was foolish, and I regretted every single day." Emma stepped forward, her hand shaking. "Dad, please. We've lost everything. We have nothing left. Please just don't leave us like this. We're so sorry. I'm so sorry." Jake didn't move. His gaze was cold, unwavering. It had taken everything in him to get to this point, to build a life that was his own. He had nothing left to give them. They had made their choices, and now they had to face the consequences. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving theirs. "You made your choices," he said quietly. "You made them together, and now you're going to live with them. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not going to be the one to fix this mess for you." Sarah's sob grew louder, and she reached for his arm, grabbing it with both hands, as if she could hold him there. "Jake, please. I love you. I was wrong. I can't live like this. Please just take us back. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Jake pulled his arm away sharply, his face hardening. "No, you don't get to play the victim now. You've had your chances. You've had all the chances in the world. This is the reality you've created." Sarah dropped her head in defeat, her body racked with sobs. Emma stood there frozen, tears streaming down her face, her mouth working as if to say something more, but unable to find the words. Jake stood there, feeling nothing. The door was right in front of him, a boundary he would not cross. He wasn't the same man who had left this house years ago, the man who had once pleaded for his family to come back. That man no longer existed. He took one last look at them, the two women who had once been everything to him. He thought of Grace, of the twins that were on the way, of the life he had built from the ashes of his old life. And then, without another word, he closed the door. The sound of the door clicking shut was final. Outside, Sarah and Emma remained, their pleas muffled by the thick wood between them. But Jake had made his decision. He had no room for them in his life anymore. He had no more mercy to give. The years passed, and Jake flourished. The pain of betrayal slowly faded, replaced with the comfort of a life he had built from the ground up, with Grace by his side and their twins running through the halls. Laughing and filled with energy, Jake found peace. He reveled in the chaos of their children, the cries and giggles, the constant flurry of activity. It was a sharp contrast to the silence that had marked his life before, a silence he had endured thinking he had lost everything. Every day, he would wake up beside Grace, their shared morning routine, a quiet comfort. She would make coffee while he packed the twins' lunchboxes. Each task an unspoken understanding of their roles, their partnership. Over the years, they had built a rhythm together, one that came with challenges, but also a deep connection. Their home, though modest, felt like a sanctuary. It was a place of love, stability, and most importantly, trust. Jake had found work as a supervisor at Miller's hardware store, using his mechanical knowledge to help customers with their projects. His colleagues respected him, and he had built genuine friendships with people who valued hard work and honesty. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it provided for his family. Meanwhile, the lives of Sarah and Emma had spiraled further into misery. The comfortable world they had once inhabited had crumbled beyond repair. Sarah's once vibrant beauty had faded with the years. She aged prematurely, her skin drawn tight over the bones of a woman who had spent too much time pursuing things that didn't matter. The strain of guilt, regret, and stress had taken a toll on her health. She had tried to rebuild, sought out new relationships, but nothing stuck. No one could replace what she had thrown away so carelessly. She spent her days in a small, rundown apartment, a far cry from the comfortable house she had once enjoyed. The first few years after Jake left were marked by desperation. She had tried to reach out to him once, but her calls had been ignored. Her letters returned unopened. Brad, the man she had once dreamed would give her the life of luxury, had disappeared when the money ran dry. There was no one left to cushion her fall. Sarah's body seemed to betray her. She had always been slender, elegant, but now she looked weary. The lines of regret were etched deep on her face. Her once shiny hair had thinned, and her energy had drained. She was constantly tired. Her doctor's visits were frequent, each diagnosis a reminder that she had wasted years on empty promises. Meanwhile, Emma, who had once seemed to have a bright future, had abandoned college after Jake left. She could no longer justify pursuing a degree when the financial support from her father had vanished. The dream of an easy, comfortable life was long gone. Instead, she worked long hours at dead-end jobs, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, barely scraping by. Every shift she worked reminded her of the harsh reality she had to face. Her anger grew. It wasn't just at her father for leaving her. It was at herself for being so complicit in the lies. She blamed her mother for their downfall, for dragging her into a world of deception and betrayal. Emma had tried to reach out to Sarah at times, but it was never enough. There was no reconciliation to be found. Their relationship had soured beyond repair, and soon Emma cut all ties with her mother, giving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. Jake never looked back. He had no reason to. The family he had once dreamed of, his perfect family, had torn itself apart. And while he couldn't say that the pain of losing them didn't hurt, he no longer felt the weight of it. Time had given him perspective. He had come to realize that he wasn't defined by the actions of others, but by how he chose to live his own life. He had made the choice to let go of the bitterness and resentment, choosing instead to focus on the life he was building with Grace and their children. There were days when the memories would flash before him. The late-night arguments, the betrayal, the broken promises, but he refused to let them have power over him anymore. The healing had come slowly, but it had come. One summer evening, Jake stood in the backyard of his home, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. Grace sat on the grass with the twins, watching as they ran around, their laughter filling the air. Jake couldn't help but smile. He was finally content, finally at peace with himself. His children were everything. The love he had for them, the pride he felt when he saw them growing, learning, and playing was a feeling he had never known before. It was pure and untainted by the past. He watched as they ran toward Grace, their tiny hands reaching for her, their joy a reflection of everything he had fought to create. "I love you," Grace said softly, looking up at him from the grass. Her smile was warm, her eyes bright, and for a moment, it was as though the world had stopped spinning. Jake walked over to her, sitting beside her on the grass, the cool evening air. "Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, like, and share in the comments. Remember, history is a witness to the past, a light of truth, a living memory, a teacher of life, a messenger of antiquity, and see you soon."